Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are having such an exhaustive conversation, such an exciting conversation looking at the education sector. This is what I have gleaned today from our conversation with Gareth Udonyi. First and foremost, when we're looking at the education sector, three material changes have happened. First one, 1964, we were taught how to speak English and to be able to respond to the colonialist. Then in 1985, it became 844. We're like, okay, we need to teach you how to be employable. And then the best part is this, 2017, the sector has changed. We have gotten into a competency-based curriculum, which is otherwise known as CBC, so that the funding that's going into the education sector is looking at the global world and trying to prepare the young Kenyan mind to be able to be more productive and to be able to appropriate value to themselves as well as to the economy in the longer term. In sum, Gerard is telling us we're in the right space. Now the question is, how do we use the resources that are allocated to this sector over the next 6 months to make a difference? In other words, Gerard, what's now the call to action? Because you are a tax expert, you're the person who's engaging with the businesses, large and small and micro out there. You're the person who has an overview of government operations and how that impacts the operations of the private sector. This decision has been made in the education sector. Does it affect your world in any way?
Yeah, I believe from the government really needs to be keen on how it handles issues regarding the education sector, mostly in the coming few months. As I highlighted before, the funds that initially that had been allocated in the education sector, they really need to proceed. The plans should just go on as usual.
So continue. So 497 billion,
yes.
Continue with 497
yes, exactly.
billion.
Yes. From my perspective, the reason why I really advocate for that is this. Let's look at one of the issues, or rather the matters that had been allocated under the education sector. If you look, we had an issue with regards to construction of schools and laboratories, which actually formed a huge chunk of the proportion that had been allocated in the education sector. So what happens under the construction industry, we are going to ensure that there are some companies who are going to benefit from that.
Okay.
If the government was to decide that there's not going to implement that project now, you can imagine several construction companies will be put off, which these companies actually have employed several individuals. And in addition to that, these companies also have the presence in the economy, has a ripple effect on the gross domestic product. So it is important for the government to continue as usual on that construction of schools, because this will actually translate in ensuring that these funds actually is distributed to the construction firms.
Okay.
Two, one of the another allocation that had been done under education was the funds that had been distributed for higher education loans. If you're keen to note, in Kenya actually, education is fairly expensive, actually, when it comes to higher education.
Okay.
We have free primary and secondary education.
But then higher education is no longer subsidized.
Exactly. So what usually happens is in most instances, you usually file people go due to the free primary education. Somebody will get up to the point that he'll study up to secondary. Then from there, he doesn't know what to go to, or the translation rate, in short, from secondary to university is usually very low because of lack of funds.
Okay.
So the government initially had clearly stated that individuals who had been proposed to go to university will continue from September.
Yes.
So there's a transition.
That transition still continues.
Exactly.
Okay.
So those funds need to be availed for individuals who do not have the capacity to pay for their higher education fees, because if the government were decided to halt these funds, what will happen is majority of the students who majorly come from low income, people who are from Turkana, Mandera, even here in Nairobi, the people who cannot be able to sustain the capability of funding their higher education. So if the government were to halt this, the translation rate from secondary to university will definitely go down.
Okay.
And currently, we are trying to ensure, as a government, we're trying to ensure that our literacy levels are actually above 80%, because currently it stands at roughly 60%, which is something that is very low.
Okay.
So we are trying to ensure that at least we need to empower every individual.
So empower everyone in the sector and continue doing as you are.
Exactly.
So I think we're coming to the tail end of the show, and I know this conversation was about expenditure continues, and if expenditure continues, it means that's more or less a muted impact on the affiliated tax revenues. Maybe can you just briefly tell us, is there any material impact on tax revenues from the sector, and then your parting shot so that we can now close this session?
Yeah, from tax perspective, okay, because the reason why I'm mentioning tax is because actually the government actually draws most of its revenues from taxes. From a tax perspective, this year there'll be a very huge income that will be received, or tax revenues that will receive from the government relating to from schools.
Okay.
To specifically narrow it down, government schools do not pay any taxes, so it's all reliant on private schools. Private schools, based on statistics, it has been estimated that private schools account for almost over 500 million of the taxes that are contributed in Kenya.
Okay.
There's no learning that is currently going on.
All right.
So parents are not paying school fees. That translates to private schools not getting anything.
And also that's only looking at the corporate. There's also the pay as you earn
exactly
element.
Exactly. So from a corporation tax perspective, that means that private schools will not be able to pay any taxes, or rather they'll be in a loss position. In addition to that, the Tax Laws Amendment Act introduced capital allowances relating to industrial building allowance on schools. Initially, it used to be at 50% on a straight line basis.
Yes.
On a straight line basis, and now it has been reduced to 10%. So that would significantly imply that the tax deductions that companies used to, or rather private schools used to enjoy, have significantly reduced. That will imply that as much as I have, considering my revenues for this year, for private schools will be significantly low. I also have a low tax deduction. So in totality, I'll be in a tax loss position. So the government technically should not expect any revenues from schools.
Should investors close the schools? Or
I'm sorry,
I need a brief answer because I've been told that our time is...
Okay, sure.
So should they close?
They shouldn't close. They shouldn't close schools. I strictly stick to my point that actually they need to look towards taking this opportunity to really empower the teachers.
Yes.
So they can decide to close by not continue with their curriculum, but ensuring that they continue their curriculum from the teacher's perspective. So it's just empowering the teachers so that when the school reopen in 2021, we can now focus our attention on the students. Exactly.
All right, Garrett, thank you so much for that conversation. That's all the time we had today. So 497 billion allocated to the sector. Garrett tells us that it needs to continue in terms of its allocation to recurrent expenditures in the sector. range. But expect a lower tax revenue base from the education sector. From corporate taxes, that's about 500 million shillings that comes from that sector alone, from the private sector. There's a higher amount that also comes from the pay-as-you-earn, the teachers who are in that sector. If you are a practitioner in that space, his encouragement is try and see how you can cut back on expenses, but continue as a going concern, because this is really a glimpse. And I think the best thing that I've heard from him today is this. 250 billion is going to be allocated into the sector for the next 6 months. We need to see the CBC fast-tracked, and there's an opportunity for us to review the inputs into this sector. So whether you are a stakeholder or you are an investor. So this is an ongoing conversation here with us today on Markets Today. I hope you can join us tomorrow when we speak to a practitioner to give us their point of view in as far as this conversation is concerned. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time. Good day.